Jumping back in, we have some more MMA action this week before the big McGregor fight, which I'll be previewing Friday. We have another Abu Dhabi Fight Island this Wednesday, starting at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. I learned my lesson this Saturday about checking the time well in advance, and I'm glad I did. So I'm going to do something a little different for this preview, where I'm just going to move bottom to top through the card, whatever catches my eye, but I'm not going to be breaking down fights per se. So in continued UFC fashion, between the first 8 fighters on this card, there is a combined 1 UFC win between them. That is just a consequence of what happens when you put together 3 fights within a week. You have to scramble and sign fighters and bring them on. There is one name of those 8 that very much stands out, and that would be Umar Nurmagomedov. The cousin of Khabib is making his octagon debut. I'm not sure if Khabib's going to be in his corner coaching him, but this is a guy who's also undefeated, who I don't know if he was wrestling a bear as a kid, as he's a bantamweight. Well, as a kid, probably not much smaller than Khabib as a kid, but been put through that same Abdullah training regimen. I don't know if there's something in the water in Dagestan, but there's certainly a culture of wrestling excellence. So obviously excited to see him make his UFC debut and see what he can do. Next fight, Mike Davis versus Mason Jones. Mike Davis is familiar to me just for putting on one of the most heartbreaking beatings I've seen in the cage, where the fighter too tough for his own good, the corner too, I don't know, to stop the fight, and the ref to, again, I don't know, to stop the fight. But it did let Mike Davis put on a clinic of what he can do. He'll be fighting an undefeated Cage Warriors prospect in Mason Jones, who, just quick glance at his record, undefeated, and most of those wins come against guys with like a 12-1 similar record. So I mean, Cage Warriors turns out some great fighters, so interesting matchup at the lightweight division. Next up, the end of the prelims is actually very good, the last 3 fights. First, we've got Sumu Darji, who had a blistering, terrifying knockout of Malcolm Gordon, a Canadian flyweight prospect. He ended that in a minute. He's a bantamweight who's moved down, who has a lot of length, a lot of reach, and a lot of power. I mean, he's fighting a 3-2 UFC newcomer, so you kind of expect him to do. You hope to see some consistency from him. Like, okay, if you're able to knock out the last guy that quickly, let's see you do something similarly impressive, and then you can really quickly get your way up the flyweight ranks. Next up, Ricky Simone, who had a great start to his UFC career and then a bit of a setback with a quick, very surprising knockout loss to Uriah Faber, and then less surprising guillotine loss to Rob Font, who just came off that amazing performance against Marlon Moraes. So nothing to hang your head up about there. He's since got a win over, oh man, of all the guys' names to forget, how can I forget this guy? Mr. Can't Make Weight. If you know, you know. But Ricky Simone, 16-3 bantamweight, one of the Contender Series success stories, I would say. Will look to continue to impress in the bantamweight division, so good fighter in Simone on the prelims. And then the headliner, you've got a classic wrestler versus striker matchup at middleweight in Omari Akhmedov versus Tom Breeze. Akhmedov coming off a loss to Chris Weidman, and Breeze coming off, well, he had a nice winning streak, which he lost via ground and pound, and then he got a win a couple months back. So both looking to generate some momentum, both in a very deep UFC middleweight division where you really can't afford, as you can only afford as few setbacks as you can manage. So important fight moving forward on who gets to have a claim at challenging towards that top 15. This kind of stands out to me as the second most interesting fight on the card. The main card opener, Leron Murphy versus Douglas Andrade. The rest of the main card, for the most part, thankfully, plenty of UFC experience, which I like to see. Murphy is a very intriguing featherweight prospect. He made his UFC debut with a draw against the highly touted Zubaira Tukov. I can't quite remember the guy's name, but very impressive debut in a fight he was supposed to lose. He since had a nice stoppage win. Douglas Andrade, they actually have a shared opponent in Zubaira, but Leron is a favorite, and I expect him to impress, but good fighter to get a look at as someone who might make a crack in the featherweight division. Next up, next in my interest is Roxanne Modafferi versus Viviane Araújo. Roxanne Modafferi is a fighter for the fans who always wonder, could I have done that? Because the answer is no, you couldn't. She's average athletically, but has the work ethic that in a very shallow women's MMA division, if you have a lifelong of work ethic, she goes and shows you can get something done. She's had 2 huge upset victories over Antonia Shevchenko and Macy Barber, both strikers who were not ready for the judo and top-heavy game of Modafferi. Her striking is, I don't want to be mean, but it is laughable. But if you watch these cards and wonder, like, what would happen if I went to a gym and, like, spent all this time trying, you get to see. So whenever you do see her, like, pull out a win, it's a feel-good moment just to see, like, this lifelong average athlete, but, like, committed to martial artists getting it done in the premier mixed martial arts league in the world, even if it's a paper-thin division against, like, girls who just don't have the well-rounded mixed martial arts experience. Vivian is a striker, so looking to see if Modafferi, who is on Tapology at least, currently the 9th ranked flyweight in the world, which is just a little mind-boggling, but see if Modafferi can get that Mangekyo Sharingan going and pull out another win. I don't really have a lot to say again about this next one. Ike Villanueva versus Vincent Mariah. I checked last night. I'm just double checking now, but I feel like neither has a win yet in the UFC, and both have some bad losses. So I think the UFC just sees something in the style matchup where they think these guys will put on, like, a banger. Yeah, neither of these guys has a win in the UFC. Vincent Moreira has a loss to Paul Craig by rear naked choke, but it started with a stand-up knockdown. And I'm sorry, but if you got knocked down by Paul Craig, then there's some holes in your stand-up game. So I think the UFC sees something in this fight where something like stand and bang crazy is going to happen, because that's the only reason I can understand why you'd put it third. The co-main is a little interesting. Warley Alves versus Mounir Lazzez. Warley Alves made his UFC debut in 2014 and has a kind of 500 record. Most notable win, the guillotine over Colby Covington, which was the only loss on Covington's record until the Usman fight. So I don't know. Colby became a much better fighter since then, but still a standout on his name. And the guy he's fighting is a highly touted striking prospect who got his debut done in impressive fashion against Abdul Al-Hazak Al-Hassan. Sorry, man, I know I just butchered it. But highly touted striking prospect against a longtime UFC vet who has a win some, lose some record. So it lets you assess the ceiling of this prospect. Is he a guy who can stop Warley, which would say the ceiling is high? Is he going to just get it done through point fighting, which has a scale of, wow, that was an absolute clinic he put on, to like, yeah, the younger guy got it done? Or is he going to fall victim to the wily grappling pressure grit that only a like 5-6 year UFC vet can bring? So we'll learn a lot about Lazzez in this fight. All right, main event time. Michael Chiesa versus Neil Magny. This will probably tap in at like 2 p.m.-ish. I think the main card begins at noon. That'll be a very interesting Wednesday morning. This is a fight between two guys who over the last few years have rejuvenated themselves at welterweight. I mean, Neil Magny has done so just in 2020. He had a fantastic one with wins over the Leech, over Anthony Rocco Martin and Robbie Lawler. Michael Chiesa had back-to-back submission losses at lightweight and finally decided to move up to welterweight, which has thus far gone spectacularly for him, with wins over Carlos Condit, Diego Sanchez, and most impressively, Rafael dos Anjos, who had a very interesting time at welterweight. But you look at the three names he lost to: Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman, and Leon Edwards. So Michael Chiesa adding his name to that list is very impressive. Now, the one thing about Chiesa is he's had such a size advantage over all of his opponents. And Diego Sanchez, who's been up and down all the weight classes, Carlos Condit, he set up a one-arm Kimura, which you can't do without crazy strength. And Rafael dos Anjos is more, all of his losses at welterweight really came down to size. I think he'll still be the bigger fighter against Magny, but Magny, as a lifelong wrestler, should have the grappling wiles to even that playing field a little. Now, Condit, also fantastic grappler, and he did it was a back and forth grappling match in their fight. So, but Chiesa came out on top. So maybe we'll see something like that. Magny also makes this interesting by having like fantastic cardio and pressure, which, I mean, Chiesa moved up to welterweight because the cut at lightweight was too much for him, but there were cardio issues. So are those still going to remain after going 5 rounds, even after moving up, or not? That's a question I have. He put on a pretty grindy performance against RDA over 3 rounds. So you'd think not. And RDA absolutely will bring the pressure if he can. But again, Chiesa was just the bigger fighter. And then is Magny how much of a stand-up advantage is Magny gonna have? Because like Chiesa's stand-up is there, but set up by the grappling. And I think Magny, he doesn't want to get stuck on the bottom, but the takedown game, the advantage goes to Magny. So if Chiesa shoots for bad shots, Magny is going to be able to sprawl the hips and either just make Chiesa suffer by like making him shoot again, pushing him down, or get on top. Well, that's going to be an interesting decision because Chiesa, as a jiu-jitsu black belt who's very high level, doesn't mind being on the bottom to look for submissions or sweeps. So is Magny going to trust his top game against Chiesa's bottom game, or is he just going to look to use his excellent jabbing and pressure to wear down Chiesa? I can see this fight going pretty much any way other than a Chiesa knockout. So if you want to go Murphy's Law or like I jinxed it, maybe bet on that. But I can see Chiesa just bigger fighter, surprising me a little with his takedown ability and staying on top of Magny. I can see him finding a submission in there, kind of like RDA had a nice arm triangle against Magny a few years back. So if Chiesa's on top and just the jiu-jitsu's flowing, that's a possibility. I can see Magny finding a stoppage on the feet against Chiesa. I can see him getting a submission over Chiesa because he's a very like guns blazing jiu-jitsu guy, and that's what let Kevin Lee and Anthony Pettis get their submissions over Chiesa. He's not, I love it, he's not conservative on the ground. He's always looking to get to a better position, but that leaves you open sometimes. And I can also see Magny just having like a top heavy game where Chiesa shoots on him and he gets on top and like wins rounds that way. So should be a fun one. The winner puts themselves in pretty good standing in the welterweight division, which right now, I mean, you've got Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns title matchup solidified for February. Then the UFC is still looking to book Khamzat Chimaev versus Leon Edwards. And we haven't heard a lot about that speculated Jorge Masvidal versus Colby Covington fight. But I would say the winner of this is throwing their hat in there, or maybe a matchup against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. After I see the fight, I'll decide like what I'd like to see for the winner, but should be fun. I'm looking forward to waking up early Wednesday morning, brewing a pot of coffee, maybe adding a little Irish cream to it, and sitting down to enjoy the Wednesday morning. Hope you do the same. This has been a long Combat Corner. My apologies. We'll be right back.